Still have no audio. Okay. Well, I don't understand why one person can hear and others can't. Make sure you are using Chrome or Firefox. Make sure your speakers are on. Try refreshing your browser. You can also try exiting and re-entering the webinar. So otherwise, I'm not sure what is going on and why so many people can't hear me. So we have one person who can hear and apparently several who can't. Well, what I'm going to do, is start and start. I am recording, I hope. The support people will join us and troubleshoot for us. Okay, so again, I'm very, very sorry for the couple of people who can hear me. I want to welcome you. We're delighted you're here today. I'm Betsy Hill, president of the BrainWare Company, and we're going to just do our best and go ahead. You can download the handouts for today's webinar by clicking on the Handouts tab, and you will find them there. And we're just going to go ahead and get started. A few housekeeping items. As I said, we are recording this, and everybody who either registered or attended will get a link to the recorded version of the webinar when it's done. And yes. Oops, no problem. Okay. Anyway, we're going to use the chat window today, which you obviously all have found because I've been hearing about all the audio problems. And again, I'm so sorry about that. If there were something I could wave a magic wand and do something about, I sure would be doing it. If you are listening to the recorded version, and then you can get a copy of the slides by emailing me, and my email information will be provided at the end. Sure, why still audio for some? Hoping support will join soon. Okay. If you can hear me, and if you would like to receive a certificate of participation for today, please type that into the chat window. And yes, so I'm going ahead and getting started as we go. So here's today's agenda. We are going to talk some about cognitive skills. Actually, as we do that, I'm going to post a poll, and we're going to start polling. Love to hear a little bit about the audience who is here today and your areas of greatest interest and concern. And if you want to go ahead and just you can click on more than one answer. And typically, when we did this webinar yesterday, we did have people choosing more than one. So far, a lot of interest in working with students who are economically disadvantaged. Also a lot of interest in individualizing and personalizing education for all students, so that's great, and students in special education. So pretty much all of those, and that's not surprising because these are populations where typically there are gaps in terms of academic performance, and so we will continue to look at those. So I'm going to close the poll at this point. Thank you very much for sharing your interest with us. That is very helpful. We're also going to talk about factors that impact the development of cognitive skills. Of course, we're talking about BrainWare SAFARI, which is a cognitive skills development software program today. We're going to look at a little bit at the process that the U.S. Department of Education has outlined in their non-regulatory guidance that they provided because there's an increasing focus under the Every Child Succeeds Act in selecting and implementing evidence-based interventions. And then we're going to take a look at some of the research studies that have been conducted with BrainWare, particularly those that deal with low SES, low socioeconomic status, and special education. So feel free to, as I said, enter any questions as we go along in the chat window, and we will try to address them either as we go along or at the end. So just a little bit of background about BrainWare SAFARI. It is software that develops cognitive skills in a fairly comprehensive way, more comprehensively than other programs that are currently available on the market. 41 different skills in a very integrated way, which is another way that it is quite different from other programs that are available. It is derived from work that has been done for many, many years in a clinical setting. So it started with a couple of clinicians, a speech pathologist and a vision developmental expert, who started to share their best practices. There are a variety of disciplines that help with the brain, that work on different aspects of brain functioning. And this small group that started 40 or 50 years ago grew to over 300, and over the course of about 40 years has developed, through trial and error and seeing what worked best, a set of exercises that were very effective. Now, they were the kinds of exercises that are done in a clinical setting with paper and pencil, cards and things like that, one-on-one. And what we did is take that set of exercises and marry it with video game technology so it can be delivered on a computer in a way that is much more affordable and engaging. So I'm going to, as we share some of the research support, it's helpful to think about the kind of usage that resulted in these outcomes. The recommended usage typically for BrainWare is 3 to 5 times a week for 30 to 45 minutes over about 12 weeks. And when we see that kind of usage, we are very confident that we're going to see some dramatic increases in cognitive skills. So next, a little bit about cognitive skills so that we can get everybody on the same page and frame out what we're talking about. So this is a chart that shows at the very top where we're trying to get all of our students, of course. So we want to make sure that they can get as far as they can academically, that they can get a good job that is rewarding and supports them and their families, that they are healthy, they stay out of jail, all that kind of thing. And there are a whole variety of skills that help with that. All of the content that we learn in school, various kinds of skills, things like civic literacy, technology literacy, media literacy, economic literacy, all those kinds of things. And then underpinning that, of course, it's very hard to be literate in all of those areas unless we have some of the basic literacy skills like reading and math and technology. But underneath the ability to learn all of that is a set of this little pyramid of cognitive infrastructure that starts at the very bottom with what we refer to as foundational cognitive skills. So that's this group at the bottom. And here we have things like our attention skills, visual processing, processing speed, sequential processing. These are the basic ways that information gets into our brains from the outside world. And if they're functioning accurately and efficiently, that's great, and we get that information in. But if not, of course, we have stumbling blocks at the very beginning of the process. On top of that are a group of cognitive skills that are now being referred to as executive functions, and those are the directive capacities of our mind. There are three core executive functions. One is working memory, which refers to our ability to hold information in our mind while we manipulate it. The second is inhibitory control, which is pretty much what it sounds like, our ability to prevent ourselves from doing something that we otherwise would. But it's also something that can happen over time. So our ability to defer gratification, for example, is also inhibitory control. And then cognitive flexibility, which is our ability to change our mindset when the rules of the world around us change. And what we're showing here, and I guess I need to also address that top one, which are higher order executive functions. And these read like lists of 21st century skills or the top of a taxonomy like Bloom's taxonomy. These are the thinking skills, the problem solving skills, the planning, collaboration, creativity, critical thinking, all of those really important things that are so essential, not just to be successful in the world, but to be successful in school. And what we're showing is that all of these underlie the ability to learn to read and do math. So it's not that they're just nice to have, but they're actually very critical in reaching any of these upper. And we're going to talk a little bit now about connecting reading and math to these cognitive skills. So first of all, reading. If I ask most teachers what the basics of reading are, I will hear something like decoding and fluency and comprehension. And indeed, those are important skills. We cannot be good readers without being able to do those things. But they are also not the most basic. There is, in fact, no decoding part of our brain. If we want to decode, we have to have a whole bunch of things that are going on together in a coordinated way at the same time. Sustaining our attention, visually discriminating, sequential processing, auditory processing are all have to be happening while we are using the parts of our brain that allow us to recognize letters and words and connect them to meaning. When it comes to fluency, skills like visual span, how much information we can take in at a glance, or our processing speed, flexible attention are all going to contribute to and enhance or impair our ability to read fluently. And then when it comes to comprehension, that's of course where rubber really meets the road in reading. And here, skills like working memory and visualization are absolutely critical. If you think about what happens when you read, you're going through a text and you're picking up pieces of information and you are holding those in your mind. That happens in working memory. If you encounter a concept or a word you don't understand, and maybe you have to stop and ask somebody about it or try to interpret what it means from the context and then bring it back into what you're reading, that again is working memory. And working memory also refers to or is the place or the ways that our mind actually connect what we're reading to what we already know, and we do that in a conscious way to understand that. So without those, we're not going to be very good readers. Here's just a very quick example. This one of my favorite childhood books, although frankly I've enjoyed reading it as an adult as well, rereading it. It's from Mary Poppins. If you want to find Cherry Tree Lane, all you have to do is ask the policeman at the crossroads. He will push his helmet slightly to one side, scratch his head, and point his white gloved finger. First to your right, second to your left, sharp right again, and you're there. So that sequence of directions and our ability to visualize them is important to understanding. If we get directions in real life like that, of course, we have to be able to remember the sequence and be able to visualize what they mean in order to be able to follow a set of directions like that. And the same kinds of principles apply in math. Spatial representations are a critical part of math. There actually is a large body of evidence now, especially over the last few years, that understanding visual spatial information is critical in all kinds of math, not just in geometry or extracting information from charts or graphs where we might typically think of directly addressing visual spatial information, but it also turns out that it is critical to developing everything from simple counting to algebra and calculus. And so it's really fundamental to mathematical thinking. Information manipulation is also really important in math as we think about concepts and what I used to refer to as story problems, as opposed to just things that we have to, equations that we have to solve without the information about, what they're referring to in real life. But today in math, everything is about real life. And so trying to hold all those pieces of information and manipulate them is going to be important. And then ultimately, of course, math is very logical, and so planning, inference, working memory are going to be really important there. This is an example, of course, of one of the kinds of skills that we are going to or kinds of problems that we're going to have to solve in math that relies very heavily on directionality and visualization and some of those visual spatial processing skills. So here you have on the left a little image that a figure on a piece of graph paper, and what we're asked to do is to figure out what it would look like if it were rotated 90 degrees counterclockwise. Okay, so we have to think about rotating it, we have to think about counterclockwise, and we have to think about what 90 degrees means. So the correct answer, for those of you who are playing along at home, is C is the correct answer. It's rotated 90 degrees counterclockwise. So we take that and we rotate it. It's not a beautiful arrow, but you get the idea here. And the others are a clockwise rotation, a 180-degree rotation, and then a shift with a rotation. So C, of course, is the correct answer. And many similar kinds of problems in math. So to talk a little bit about the kinds of things that impact cognitive skill development, and this is, I'm sure, not an exhaustive list, but these are many that are some of the most important that many of our children and ourselves frankly are dealing with. We all have cognitive strengths and weaknesses because our cognitive skills develop largely in a combination of our genetics and our experience. And genetics are important, but experience is absolutely vital because our genes are not expressed and our cognitive skills and our processes don't develop except in interaction with the outside world. And then we have various aspects of our experience like nutrition and sleep and stress and trauma and bullying, which is probably a specific example of trauma, all of which are going to affect cognitive capacity and the development of our cognitive skills. There's an ample amount of information that has been developed over the last number of years on the impact of socioeconomic status. And what we know is that the brains of children and adults for that matter, who come from impoverished environments are less well developed in many areas. Everything from our working memory to our visual spatial processing to the hippocampus, which is where memories are formed and retrieved. The very ability to create and retrieve new memories is impacted by SES, as well as things like drugs, chemotherapy, mental illness, and all of those kinds of things. So lots of potential impacts on cognitive skills. But the nice thing is that our experience, our environment, if we adapt it, and cognitive training is one way of doing that, is going to be able to help. And so what we're seeing here is a focus on the areas that are developed by BrainWare SAFARI, very heavy emphasis and in a very comprehensive and integrated way on foundational cognitive skills and core executive functions, and also the basics of starting to integrate them into higher order cognitive skills. So to talk a little bit now about the process that has been suggested, and this is came out as non-regulatory guidance from the U.S. Department of Education. And frankly, this is a process that is used in best practice by many schools and districts and other organizations. The first step is identifying local needs, then selecting the relevant intervention that is based on evidence, planning for implementation, then implementing, and finally examining and reflecting. So when we start with identifying local needs, this is where stakeholders and schools and districts would typically involve a variety of stakeholders, from school board members to teachers to students to administrators to the local community, local businesses. So there are a variety of perspectives on the kinds of gaps and inequities and what might be causing them. And what we're going to do now is take a little look at some of the local needs that might arise, some of those that you've already expressed in our little poll as we started, that suggest that you might want to consider a cognitive training program like BrainWare. So first of all, we want to talk a little bit about the children from low SES. Often this is the case, and you may have a school district where children from disadvantaged economic environment continue to lag the performance of their more economically advantaged peers, or to lag grade level expectation. So you might look at average performance on state or tests, or on district-wide summative or normative tests, the percent of students below basic, or even students qualifying for a gifted program. So you can see disparities maybe overall, or you may see them at the very bottom end or the very top end of the spectrum of abilities and performance. When it comes to special education, particularly those with learning disabilities tend to lag the general population and in terms of academic performance, and or tend to make very incremental gains in reading and math rather than actually closing the gap. So again, we can look at average performance. We might look at the percentage of the population that is categorized as special education is receiving support through IEPs or other accommodations. The cost to serve students in special education is often a consideration. And sometimes it's not necessarily about children who are in special education, but simply those who are struggling. We often hear concerns that might arise from parents and students themselves about the difficulty of getting homework done in a reasonable amount of time, where a half-hour assignment might take a struggling child 2 or 3 hours to complete. And of course, that's not what we want. With English language learners, often, we see that they tend to lag the performance of their English-speaking classmates and or grade level expectations, and that they also struggle to get to the point, not just of very basic understanding of the language, but the ability to manage the language in a way that allows instruction to be provided in English rather than another language. When it comes to the overall population, again, as we did that poll, I saw that a number of people are looking for ways to individualize, differentiate instruction and learning, and the ability to base that on cognitive strengths and weaknesses is a key. If you look at things like the universal design for learning, that's absolutely inherent in that. So addressing attention and executive function issues, or adapting instruction to cognitive strengths and weaknesses, or simply supporting everybody's ability to learn and improve their ability to benefit from their education and graduate college and career ready. So just not surprising and not new for anybody here. This is performance on a state assessment. It happens to be Pennsylvania, but frankly, I could choose just about any state and just about any set of assessments that are done, and you'll typically see a very similar pattern where we're looking at the percentage of students performing at basic and below, and traditionally this is, and historically over many, many years, it hasn't changed very much, that low SES students, English language learners, those with IEPs, are lagging pretty considerably the overall population. So now what we want to do is talk about selecting an evidence-based intervention. Over 30 studies have been performed with BrainWare across a variety of different populations. We're going to be focusing today on low SES and special ed because we want our evidence-based interventions to be as relevant as possible to the concerns and the gaps and inequities that we see. So this includes a variety of peer-reviewed published research as well as a number of field studies. And so what we're going to do is focus today on those first two populations, starting with students from low SES. So what we're going to have 3 studies that I'm going to share with you. The first one is a pilot study, actually 2 pilot studies that were conducted in an Indiana urban elementary school district with that was low SES, and students in 3rd through 5th grades. In the first pilot, the students were selected by the principal because the families were likely to support participation in an after-school program, which is when this was conducted. In the other, the students were selected by the teachers because they were very far below standard in grade level in reading. In both cases, there were 12 weeks, 10 weeks in this case, actually, of cognitive training with BrainWare, 3 to 4 times a week, 45 minutes per session. And the pre and the post testament in this case was the COGAT, the Cognitive Abilities Test. I'm going to show you a little bit about that for those of you who may not be familiar with it. But one of the things I want you to start to think about is what might be some of the differences that we would see between a hand-selected group of students focusing on those who would have family support and maybe another group that was known to be very low in reading. So we'll come back to that in a minute. Just briefly to look at the COGAT, it has 3 sections, one of which is verbal. Here are some examples of the verbal questions, classifying categories of words, sentence comprehension, which is being able to pull in the correct word that would make the sentence make sense, and then verbal analogies. Something new is to old as wet is to dry. Another section on the COGAT is a quantitative section. One is quantitative relationships, so trying to figure out whether one set of relationships is larger or smaller or equal to another term. And then understanding counting in series, 5, 10, 15, 20, or counting by 2s or 3s or 10s or whatever it might be. And then building an equation, just so basic arithmetic there. And then the nonverbal, which I always find the most interesting, I guess, is figure classification. So we had word classification in the verbal section. Here it's figures, understanding what is in common with a group of figures, and then finding another one that would fit within that group. Figure analogies, so very much like word analogies, but using visual graphical representations and figures in this case. And then figure analysis. This is a square of paper that gets folded in half. You punch little holes in it, and then you unfold it and have to determine what it might look like. So that's basically. And then overall, you take those 3 sections, and they have a formula they use to combine it into an overall composite score, which is a predictor of overall academic ability. So if we look at the pre-test performance of these 2 different pilot groups, the first one being the group that was had the most supportive parents and families to make sure that they would attend an after-school program, and you can see their average performance a little bit above middle of the road in this case, and if you did this in a higher SES school, you might see a much higher average performance. But then we can also then look at the students that were chosen because they were very low in reading. And here, the most distinctive feature of this group is their very low performance on their verbal reasoning test in the COGAT. And that just makes sense. We probably would expect that students who were chosen because they were really struggling readers, there's a reason for that. It's not just that they're lazy or don't like to read. In fact, they have cognitive weaknesses in those areas that are standing in the way. And if you think about a group of students that is performing at the 35th percentile on average, it's going to be very, very difficult. If you're below the 40th percentile on the COGAT in any area, it's going to require a significant adjustment to the curriculum and to instruction and to the kind of support that you do for these students to learn. So they are really, really struggling, and their teachers actually, one of them told me they were pulling out their hair. They just couldn't figure out how to get these students to learn. So with the first one, this will show the before and after. And you can see an average improvement of 12 percentile points on the COGAT, improvements across the board in the verbal, quantitative, and nonverbal, as well as in the composite, the overall score. And then one of the other ways to look at this data is to think about these various categories. So if you have, as I said before, if you have someone below the 30th or the 40th percentile, it's going to require some significant struggle. At the 70th percentile or above, at that upper end, those are students who are going to learn well without any adjustments to the curriculum or the instruction. You put them in a classroom and they are just going to be really good learners. In the middle, might require some adjustment, a little bit of extra support, a little bit of extra repetition, but basically children who can learn in a typical educational environment. And so you can see what's happened now with these students is we have many, many fewer students in those lower ranges. And actually at the end of, with this particular group, we had almost 2/3 of the students who were performing at that 70th percentile or higher. Now we're going to look at the second group. These are the students who are so low in their reading. And we see some strong similarities in terms of their results. And in fact, an average improvement of 13 percentile points compared to the 12 percentile points we saw with the first group. And in fact, we see this consistently with all kinds of different populations around the country where we see this 12 to 13 percentile point gain over and over and over again. And it's really exciting to see that in this verbal area. So these kids who were really struggling are now almost at the middle of the pack, but on average at a level where they are going to be able to learn in a typical instructional setting with perhaps some extra support. And often what we see is that the reading interventions that are done after using BrainWare are even more effective and more rapidly effective than they otherwise would be. Again, a significant shift in the distribution of the performance, the cognitive performance of these students, where it now is much more similar to what we would expect of a typical population, with 1/3 of the students performing at that 70th percentile or above. So those are, again, the students who went from really struggling in many ways to they're going to be just good learners. The next study I want to talk about is one that was conducted in Canada with the 3rd graders across an entire school district. So this was a larger number of students. The other one was about 30 students in each of those classes. So to give you a sense of the scope of that. What happened here is that some of the students used BrainWare in the fall, some of them used it in the spring, so we were able to use the spring users of the program as a comparison group. We took the Canadian version of the COGAT 3 times, September, January, and June. So if we look at the students who used the program actually this is overall, combining both cohorts. You can see, and again, verbal, quantitative, nonverbal, and the composite scores here at the bottom. Oh, what a very bad drawer I am today. And I'm going to just clear that. And in this case, this was a really very, very diligent, very effective implementation, great frequency and intensity of use, and they used it for slightly longer than in the previous. And here we actually, on the composite, saw an overall gain of 17 percentile points. So as you can see, going from pretty much the middle of the pack to, in many cases, on average, hitting that 78th percentile or above. And in fact, if we look at the distribution, we again see many fewer students performing in those lower tiers, and here it was 50% of the students afterwards who are performing at that 70th percentile or above. So I like to call this the Lake Wobegon, where everybody, all the children are above average. Certainly not every single one of them, but many of them now. The other thing that we did with this is to, or the district did, we're not involved in the testing. They also implemented and administered the Canadian Test of Basic Skills, which includes a reading component, a language component, a math component, and then, of course, what they would call a composite, we would call a composite score, which is overall, again, predictive of academic performance. And what you're seeing is that over the course of the school year, very significant improvements and growth in grade equivalence in these areas. In many of the areas, a grade equivalent and a half over what would be typically we would expect a single grade equivalent improvement in these areas. And again, this was a high poverty school district. One last one, and again using the COGAT, so you can hopefully see some consistency here. This is with over multiple years, the second grade in a school district in South Carolina. And their original goal in using the program was to see if they could improve the number of students that were performing at a level that would qualify them for a gifted program. And they had a number of criteria, but those that are scoring at the very top end cognitively. And what had happened is that there were some particularly high poverty schools who, when they instituted the COGAT as the test that would qualify them for gifted, as opposed to teacher recommendations and grades, they had some schools that had stopped qualifying any students for the gifted program. And of course, this was an inequity, and they really wanted to address that. So this is a composite look at almost 1,000 students over this time period. What you're seeing here is over multiple years, you're seeing the percentile point improvement in all of the subtest areas of the COGAT. If you look down here at the composite, you will see that over and over again, we see something around that 11, 12 percentile point improvement. And so a great deal of consistency over many, many years, or a number of years in this population. We also can now look at, this is one of the reasons for showing this to you, is the number of students who were actually qualifying for the gifted program, which actually did increase every year. Additional students qualified for the gifted program. The students who have a 96th percentile score on the composite score automatically qualify, and you can see here the number of students the last year that we have reported data for being 6% of the population, which is rather, really quite impressive. And then other students who qualified based on their score in one part of the COGAT and their combination with other test scores. And as you can see, what starts to happen, and then those who qualified for additional testing, some of which would then ultimately qualify. So over these years, what we saw was that the percentage of students qualifying as gifted in these schools was actually, after they used BrainWare, was higher than the overall average qualifying for the gifted program. So it's not just at the lower end. We looked at some of the students who are at the very low end, but at the higher end, we also can see some improvements in this population. So now what we want to do is we want to take a look at, oh, of course, sorry, one more slide. Looking at, again, something where we're going to see, after using BrainWare, the distribution of students really reflecting a typical population, a normally developing population, as opposed to those who are low SES. So now we're going to move on to special education. This is research that was conducted by Dr. Sarah Abson as part of her doctoral dissertation. In this case, she was working with students with specific learning disabilities, and she used the Woodcock-Johnson cognitive battery and some of the tests of achievement as the pre and post test. She translated the scores into something called a relative proficiency index, where 90% is the level that's expected of a normally developing student. So you can see that 90% bar up here. And you can also see that on the pre-test, both the control group and the BrainWare group were performing quite a bit lower than 90%, just a little bit above 60% proficiency. And that gap is not surprising at all, because we know that these students have cognitive deficits in areas that are going to impair their learning. Not much change over the course of the 12 weeks that they used the program, or didn't use the program. In fact, what was happening here is that the control group students were receiving their normal reading and math interventions that they were entitled to, but the BrainWare group also received BrainWare. Not much change for the control group. The BrainWare group, on average, scored at 89% proficiency on the post-test, so virtually closing the gap to what would be considered normally developing. And what that does is then enable them to perform much better, much more really accelerated progress. It was 0.8 of a grade equivalent in reading and a full grade equivalent in math over the course of those 12 weeks. And then what this next slide does is break the cognitive performance down into the subtest areas of the Woodcock-Johnson, where we really see the connection to the kinds of skills that are being developed in BrainWare. Things like verbal working memory, short-term memory, broad attention. You can see how low these students were in those areas, and that across the board we're getting them very close to, sometimes even surpassing the level that would be considered normally developing. So reinforcing that connection between cognitive capacity and academic performance. This kind of research, research using the Woodcock-Johnson, has also been conducted in a number of other studies. This is one with students, again, needing some extra support, who were identified by their teachers as needing some of that extra help. And this was a broader age range from 7 up to 16. In fact, this district ultimately implemented the program with all students in 3rd through 12th grade, but using the Woodcock-Johnson and, again, an after-school program. And what we're seeing here, this was a smaller group, so we're going to look at all of the individual students. And what you can see is their physical age represented by the red line, and that in most cases, these students were somewhat below, sometimes pretty significantly below, their physical age in terms of their intellectual development. So we're looking at age equivalent here. So obviously you have here a 16-and-a-half-year-old or so who is got the intellectual ability of a 15-year-old. Here's a 16-year-old who's performing more like about a 13-year-old. And so those gaps are what we would see on the pre-test, and you can see the results of the post-test, where on average we had over a 3-year improvement over those 10 weeks. So very, very significant. And when we have used the Woodcock-Johnson in studies, as you saw before with Dr. Abson's research, but also in other studies, we will typically see something like a 4-month improvement, which would be over 12 weeks, which is 4 months and 3 months, pretty much what you'd expect. But this dramatic improvement is obviously pretty exciting. One more study that I want to share with you, because this really highlights the ability to start to close those gaps for students this one actually addresses both those in free and reduced lunch, those who are struggling, as well as those who have IEPs. This is a school district in Pennsylvania that used BrainWare for a semester. And it's actually, what we're going to look at here are the results on a test called GRADE. This is a overall reading test that includes word reading, word meaning, vocabulary, sentence comprehension, passage comprehension, and listening comprehension. So it's a pretty broad-based reading test that the district uses because it is predictive of performance on the state test. This is a fairly high-performing district, as you can see when you look at the all group. So the light green line is the grade expectation at 4th grade. The dark green line is the grade expectation at 5th grade. And we can see bars. The students use the program here in 5th grade, and so we used 4th grade as the baseline, as their benchmark. And you can see that the students were performing above grade level. If you look at all of the students here, we're performing above grade level in 4th grade, even more above grade level in 5th grade, which is great. Everybody feels good about that. They don't necessarily feel as good about it when we start to break these apart into subgroups. So if we take those who are performing, the core group is at or above grade level, the below core is those who are performing below grade level, we start to see that real strong disparity that we often see. Teachers see this all the time in their classrooms. And for the core group, again, they were way above grade level in 4th grade. They're even more above grade level in 5th grade. Nice improvement. But we also see some really dramatic improvement for this below core group. So these are the struggling kids, the ones who aren't performing at grade level. And they start to catch up. And this is just in the course of 1 year, where they have gained 18 points versus the core group that gained 8. So starting to narrow that gap. And what we saw in this particular study was that the students who had IEPs had a very dramatic. They were way below grade level in 4th grade. Now they're substantially above grade level on this test in 5th grade. And the final group is free and reduced lunch, so this corresponds to the low SES students, where again, they were below grade level in 4th grade, now performing above grade level in 5th grade. So we are, yes, about 10 minutes to go. I'm going to skip over one study, but you'll have that. And I do want to emphasize also that all of these studies, the reports, are on our website, on the research page. And so all of those are available for you to download, review, and would be happy to answer any questions you have about any of those at any time. So that was a big focus on that first step of identifying and choosing a evidence-based intervention for our students. There are some other questions that really need to be addressed at this step as well. Things like, how can the success of the intervention be measured? We have schools who have used sometimes cognitive measures, sometimes only academic measures, and there are lots of options here. We can really help you think through that process. The resources required to implement the intervention. Again, we work very closely with our schools and districts to think through all that, making sure that everything is in place that needs to be, as well as helping to get buy-in, sharing this kind of information, doing webinars or presentations, sometimes for school boards, sometimes for parents, sometimes for teachers. All of those are important constituencies for buy-in. And then thinking over time, how that will be sustained. Often schools will implement the program across the board to give students a big boost, but then institutionalize the program at a particular grade level so that it's something that all students experience. But it's used in a variety of different times and ways in different situations. And then the potential impact of the intervention and the cost involved with it. BrainWare SAFARI is very affordable, and would be happy to talk about the pricing, but many schools and districts that have used the program have found it to be something that they can readily manage within their existing budgets. We have some districts, in fact, the first district who used the program district-wide was able to reduce the number of students receiving IEPs rather dramatically. They went from 18% down to 5%, which meant that their special education resources could be focused on the students who really, really needed it, and other students were now able to learn much more in parallel with their peers and their classmates. The third step is a plan for implementation, and again, here are the sort of basic elements of this that you want to think through. Not necessarily unique to BrainWare, but we work through this with all of our clients so that they are sure that they can implement in a way that's really going to get the best benefit for their students, all the way from determining the parameters and conditions, especially if it's going to be a study or a pilot study, through the decisions on assessments, setting up the schedule, training for teachers and coaches, presenting it to the community, and at the end of the day to the analysis and evaluation of the impact of the program, as you've seen in the research that I've shared with you. The last two steps are actually implementing and examining and reflecting afterwards. This is not something that we assume is just going to be on autopilot. We actually provide significant support throughout the implementation through our customer service, through our progress monitoring, which we tend to check in periodically, review the progress of students throughout the program, and touch base periodically so that we can ensure that that things are going well and that everybody's getting the support that they need. So we do have some time for questions here. For anybody who can hear me, again, I feel terrible, and hopefully the sound will be working in the recording so that we can share more information together, and would be happy to work with anybody and conduct a demonstration or review some of what we've covered today on a phone call so that when we can actually hear each other. So that would be great. So feel free to type any questions into the chat window. And as we're doing that, I do want to also share with you that if you are an educator or clinician and would like to check BrainWare out on your own, we are happy to set that up for you. We find that scheduling a 30-minute demonstration is really helpful because I can quickly give you a tour of the program, or whoever's working with you can do that. And then when you are using the program yourself, you have that context. And as you work through up the progressively challenging levels, you'll have a better sense for how challenging it does get and what the scope of the program is. If that is something that you would like to do, just please email me at bhill@mybrainware.com. If you are, just checking to see, no questions that I'm seeing at this point. If you are listening to this webinar, the recorded version, please feel free to email me for a copy of the slides and the other handouts, which we'd be happy to provide you. And here is my contact information. Feel free to call me, and we really look forward to having an opportunity to have additional conversation with you, and appreciate your spending the time. I hope that those who are still on have actually been able to hear me. Perhaps you have, perhaps you haven't. In any event, we really appreciate your time. We know that time is one of the most valuable things that you have, and really are grateful for you sharing some time with us. So I will look forward to further conversations, and I hope you all have a wonderful day. Thanks so much.